Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to It's Evil. I'm Meosha Bean, your host. This radio series tells genuine crime stories involving real individuals. Simply things that we cannot explain. I usually say the creepiest crimes happens in small towns. Who knows, maybe it's because there's so many hidden secrets. In this season, we have 10 real terrifying episodes. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Gore Culture, your go-to source for newest horror movies, thrillers, sci-fi, and more. And my production company, M.V.B Films Productions, for making this episode possible. Welcome to It's Evil, Real Atlanta Cases. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a mysterious killer terrorized Black communities in Atlanta. One by one, Black children and young adults were being kidnapped and turning up dead days or weeks later. These grisly cases would later become known as the Atlanta child murders.
We have a black male. We do not know any more about that, including the cause of death.
Police eventually arrested a local man named Wayne Williams in connection to the heinous crimes. But Williams was only ever convicted of 2 murders, far less than the 29 slayings he was implicated in. Furthermore, he was found guilty of killing 2 men in their 20s, not children. Although the homicides appeared to stop after Williams was arrested, some believe that he was not responsible for the Atlanta child murders, including some of the victims' families. The tragic case was later explored in the Netflix series Mindhunter in 2019. And that same year, the real Atlanta child murders case was reopened in the hopes of finding the truth. On a balmy summer day in July 1979, the first body linked to the Atlanta child murders case was discovered. 13-year-old Alfred Evans was found in a vacant lot, his cold body shirtless and barefoot. He had been killed by strangulation. Tragically, he had disappeared just 3 days earlier. But as police were investigating the apparent crime scene in the vacant lot, they couldn't help but notice a strong odor emanating from nearby vines, and they would soon discover the body of another Black child, 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith. Unlike Evan Smith had been killed by a gunshot, but eerily, he was found just 150 feet away from Evans.
I would like a child's picture to be run on the media immediately.
The evidence that we have does not indicate that we have one person responsible for all of the murders.
The next bodies uncovered were 14-year-old Milton Harvey and 9-year-old Yusuf Bell. Both children had been strangled to death. Bell, the 4th victim, had been living in a housing project just 4 blocks away from where his body was found. His death hit the local community especially hard. 4 murdered Black kids in the span of a few months raised suspicion among the victims' families that the crimes could be related. Still, the Atlanta police did not establish any official links between the murders. By March 1980, the death toll had reached 6. At this point, it became increasingly clear to residents that their communities were in serious danger. Parents started imposing curfews on their children. And yet, victims kept turning up.
10-year-old Bobby Lee was in a hurry. He thought he was late for school. He ran down the hill behind the apartment complex where he lives at 950 Pryor Street. At the bottom of the hill, he says, 2 men, one white, one black, grabbed him and tried to throw him into a car. Bobby's mother was at the top of the hill. She heard her son scream and saw one of the men he was struggling with.
I told him, get it so-and-so, leave my son alone. And when they saw me, they ran.
Bobby had put up a fight until his mother was able to scare his attackers away.
I beat him.
You bit him?
Uh-huh.
Where?
On the arm.
The experience left both Bobby and his mother shaking.
I was shaking. I was nervous. He was nervous too. Me and him both were nervous. We ran back in the house and shut the door. We thought the guys would come back around, pick us up.
Police looked for the men and a gray 65 or 66 Cadillac. They did not find them. A police spokeswoman says the task force on missing children is investigating this incident. But the task force has had an awful lot of phone calls today with reports of abductions or missing children. The people taking those calls say most of them are due to the confusion caused by the sudden cancellation of school, with a lot of parents not being sure just where their kids are.
It was, I called the police. It was the latter part of August, I believe, when a friend of mine and myself, we followed a white male to the top of the hill in the Allenton complex because he had been seen often out here giving kids candy. And I got his tag number down and everything. And I called the police station, and I told the female that answered the phone that I wanted to talk to an officer. And she connected me with somebody. And the person that got the message, they didn't, I told them that it was a white male giving up black kids candy in the Allen Temple complex. And she told me that if I saw him again, to call the police. That was it.
Yeah.
What tell me everything that happened from the beginning. What you were doing there and what happened.
See, I was sitting on the steps, and then so it was a boy named. It was these little old kids. There was a girl named Rainbow and a boy named Shocker. They ran out to the car, and the man gave them some candy. And then they went back, and then so they went back, and then they ate up that candy. He paused, and then when they got ready, they said, "Give me some more." And then they went back over there, and then when they ate that up, the man was gone. Then.
Okay, so have you seen him before that or after?
No.
So what you're telling me is that there's a guy who comes around.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell me what.
When he be coming around, he come around that way.
What's he do?
What he'll come in here, and I be looking out the window sometimes, and I see him, and all them little old people run up there, get some candy from him.
He gives out candy?
Yeah.
To who?
To some little bit old kid about that little. They run up to the car. He'll give them some candy.
And what's he look like?
He white, and he got blonde hair, and he had on. It was some kind of suit. I don't know what color it is. It was kind of beige looking.
Now, here's a question. Is he scary, or does he look like the kind of person you could trust?
He look mean. He look scary, yeah.
But do the little kids trust him?
Yeah.
Why?
They just ran up to him, and then so they got some candy from him. They wouldn't even pay no attention. They just ran up to him.
Did police ever come over to talk to him?
No. Didn't nobody call the policeman. I didn't even know what to say to the policeman.
They were almost all boys, except for 2 girls. And though a couple of victims linked to the case were later identified as adult men, most of them were children, and all of them were black. African American communities in and around Atlanta were gripped with fear and anxiety, but they were also extremely frustrated, since the Atlanta police had still not drawn a connection between the cases. Even with heightened vigilance in the community, kids kept disappearing. In March 1980, Willie Mae Mathis was watching the news with her 10-year-old son, Jeffrey, when they both saw investigators moving the body of one of the victims. She warned her young son about interacting with strangers.
But his profile was that it was someone who was a loner, someone who understood police procedures, a highly intelligent individual, an African American, and somebody who was very comfortable moving in and out of the community.
Georgia officials requested that the FBI join the investigation. 5 of the nation's top homicide detectives were brought in as consultants, and 2 U.S. Justice Department officials were also dispatched to the city to provide support. From 1979 to 1981, 29 black children and young adults were identified as victims in the Atlanta child murders. On April 13, 1981, FBI Director William Webster announced that the Atlanta police had identified the killers, seemingly indicating multiple perpetrators of 4 of the slain children. However, authorities lacked sufficient evidence to file charges. Then a month later, a police officer working the department stakeout operation along the Chattahoochee River heard a splashing sound. The officer then saw a station wagon pass overhead on the South Cobb Drive Bridge. Suspicious, he decided to stop the driver for questioning. That driver was a 23-year-old man named Wayne Williams. The officer let Williams go, but not before grabbing a few fibers from his car. And just 2 days later, the body of 27-year-old Nathaniel Carter was discovered downstream. Eerily, the body wasn't far from where the body of 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne had been found just a month earlier. In June 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested in connection to the deaths of Payne and Carter. He would later be convicted of the murders of both men who were among the few adult victims in the Atlanta murders case. And Williams was sentenced to life in prison, but although he was accused of being the Atlanta child killer, he was never convicted of any other murders.
My client is innocent. He did not kill anyone.
Baltimore.
I had a great deal of compassion for him. He was like a child who was spoiled, naughty, mischievous, but I didn't get the feeling that he was a bad child.
Sharon Blakely has been an icon in the local Atlanta music scene since the early 80s. She operated this store on Boulder Crest Road that sold records and jewelry. She also developed young singers who practiced inside her store. She says Williams was always hanging around, watching her kids.
How would you describe him?
I don't know. I guess he was different from everybody, all other kids I knew. He was weird.
Wayne Williams is the man who was convicted in connection with the Atlanta missing and murdered children case in the early 1980s. Now, he says that he helped create his own fate by the way he acted as the case unfolded. Williams, who rarely gives on-camera interviews, talked about his case at length with Channel 2's investigative reporter Mark Winning.
The two young men you were convicted of killing. Did you kill them?
No, I didn't. I never met either victim in my life.
Convicted in two of the cases known as Atlanta's missing and murdered, reportedly implicated in others, Wayne Williams still says he didn't do it. That much hasn't changed, though Williams maintains he has.
This is not the same Wayne Williams people saw running around in the street making fun of the police. Not at all. This is a mature person who can look back and say in hindsight, you know, Wayne, you were an idiot back then, because I dug my grave just as much as anybody else by the way I acted.
For example?
Okay, for example, during the time when I first became a suspect, we had the little police chases and things of this type. And I never thought for any minute that I'd be here right now. To me, it was almost a game, because I said, well, heck, I hadn't done anything, you know, I'll just play with these people. But now, since I'm a little older and can look back on that, I can see how this may have given people the impression, look how he's acting, because they never knew Wayne Williams. And what Wayne Williams has done over the past 14 years, I have found out who I really am.
Williams is at Valdosta Correctional Institution in South Georgia. He is in the general population, and he told us works as a dorm orderly first thing in the morning. After that, he says much of his time is spent with the recreation department.
I officiate a lot of games, and right now I'm in the middle of coaching a softball season. We're undefeated so far. We're going to try and keep it that way.
We also encountered the man convicted in perhaps Georgia's most infamous murder case in another prison activity. At a prison revival service.
One of the things that I've done since I've been in prison, I'm pursuing a degree in the ministerial field at this time. And it's something I think that the death of my mother helped spur me on. Because I found out that unless a person matures in all aspects of the life, you don't have a complete person. The way I was acting and all wasn't pleasing to God. So I said, Wayne, you got to make a change. And that's what I've done.
But we come back to the murders he is in prison for, where he still maintains his innocence.
Now, you know, some of our viewers are probably saying he had his day in court. Jury found him guilty.
During the time that the case came about, the city was in a state of mass hysteria. And if I, myself, being a young black man, had been on that jury out of simple fear, I probably would have voted for conviction too out of ignorance. From what we have been able to gather in 14 years plus of investigation, there was never a single killer operating in Atlanta. From what we know, you had several groups of unrelated killings that happened at the same time. Some of them involved certain race hate groups that we know about. Some of them involved family or kin of some of the victims. Some of them involved sex groups, and some of them involved drug and criminal activities.
How could you possibly gather evidence to implicate 4 different separate groups?
Well, Mark, the thing about it, the evidence has always been in the police file.
There was nothing in it to suggest that we could prove a case on anybody else ever.
In the police files?
In the police file.
This morning, we're continuing our extensive and exclusive reports of the Atlanta child murders, where 29 children and young adults were murdered in Atlanta between 1979 to 1981. 11 Alive's Naima Abdullahi brings us a chilling recollection of a man who says he escaped Wayne Williams when he was just 7 years old.
Isaac Rogers says he's finally sharing what happened to him nearly 40 years ago. Around the same time, his brother went missing. His brother was a victim during the Atlanta child murders, and he says he almost became one.
They got the right guy. That was one of the most frightening times of my life, which automatically means you are going to be very detailed in what you're observing, and you're going to remember this person's face.
Nearly 40 years ago, Isaac Rogers says he walked to a neighbor's apartment with his 2 cousins, and as they were walking out, it turned into a nightmare.
As we got ready to exit her porch and walk down the stairs, that's when the guy that I now know of as Wayne Williams stepped from behind the wall to block us off from going down the stairs.
He says his 2 cousins got away, which left him by himself.
The only thing I could do was to turn back around, which is what I did. I went back and I started to beat on Ms. Willie Mae's door to get her to open the door.
Isaac Rogers says Wayne Williams was still approaching him when the neighbor came to the door.
Which is how I was able to tell in such detail everything he was wearing.
He says he's kept this secret for years because of fear.
I feel great now because I had a chance to share my secret with the rest of the world.
Isaac Rogers says he doesn't know if Wayne Williams killed all the victims, but he says that's his brother's killer, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers, who went missing after he walked Isaac to his school bus on November of 1980.
Yeah, it's such a shame that he was robbed of his potential.
Investigators say evidence connected Williams to the Atlanta child murders, but he was sentenced to life in prison for killing 2 adults.
In June 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested in connection to the deaths of Payne and Carter. He would later be convicted of the murders of both men, who were among the few adult victims in the Atlanta murders case, and Williams was sentenced to life in prison. But although he was accused of being the Atlanta child killer, he was never convicted of any other murders. We'll see you next time on It's Evil, Real Atlanta Cases. Good night.